You lied about your bloodline? Alien princess protected human lover from royal execution. The great hall of the Aurelian Empire was silent in a way that felt heavy, as if the air itself was waiting. Tall crystal pillars reflected soft blue light across the polished floor. At the center of the hall stood two figures who did not belong together, at least not according to the laws of the empire. One was Princess Celara of House Valian, the future ruler of 1,000 star systems. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, but inside her mind raced. She had stood before this throne many times before, but never like this. Never as someone being judged. Beside her stood Elias Ward, a human. He wore no royal clothing, no symbols of power. His hands were folded behind his back, his face quiet and controlled. He had learned long ago that panic never helped. Still, he could feel the weight of thousands of eyes on him. To most of them, he was a mistake standing on sacred ground. At the far end of the hall, the High Council sat upon their elevated seats. Ancient beings, some of them older than human civilization itself. Their forms were different from one another, but their beliefs were the same. Bloodline was everything. Purity meant stability. Anything else was chaos. The trial began with a single voice. Princess Celara of House Valian, the lead counselor said, his tone cold and formal. You are accused of deception against the throne. Celara did not bow her head. I am aware of the charge. Murmurs spread across the hall. Royals were trained to show humility before the council, but Celara had learned something different during her years among humans. Respect did not mean surrender. The counselor continued. You claimed that the human known as Elias Ward carried dormant noble genetic markers. You used this claim to justify your bond with him. Elias felt the shift in the room. This was the moment. The truth, finally spoken aloud. That claim, the counselor said, has been proven false. The silence that followed was sharp. Celara closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, her voice was steady. Yes, she said, it was false. Gasps echoed through the hall. Not because she denied it, but because she admitted it so easily. You lied, another council member said, to us, to the Empire. Yes, Celara replied again. Elias turned slightly, surprised. He had known the truth, of course. They had spoken about it many nights ago. Still, hearing her say it here so openly made his chest tighten. Then you understand the consequence, the lead counselor said. The bond is invalid. The human has no standing. His presence near the throne is a violation of imperial law. Celara did not look at Elias. Not yet. The punishment, the counselor continued, is permanent exile from all Aurelian systems. Elias expected fear to rise inside him. Instead, he felt calm. Humans had faced worse than exile. His ancestors had crossed oceans with nothing but hope. Compared to that, losing stars felt almost familiar. Celara finally turned to him. For a brief second, the princess disappeared, and there was only a woman looking at someone she loved. Elias gave her the smallest nod, a silent message. Whatever happens, stand tall. She turned back to the council. No, she said. The word was simple. It landed like a shockwave. You do not deny the law? The counselor asked. I deny its worth, Celara replied. The murmurs grew louder. Council members shifted, their long robes rustling with irritation. You stand here because of that law, one of them said. Your bloodline grants you the right to rule. Celara lifted her chin. My bloodline gave me a position. My choices decide whether I deserve it. The hall erupted in quiet disbelief. Royals were taught never to question the system aloud. To do so was unthinkable. The lead counselor leaned forward. You protected this human with a lie. Why? Celara answered without hesitation. Because if I had told the truth, you would never have listened to him. Elias felt his throat tighten. He had never asked her to lie for him. She had done it because she understood the Empire better than anyone else. You claim his value lies outside blood, the counselor said. Explain. Celara gestured toward Elias. He has no noble ancestors. No engineered perfection. What he has is perspective. He sees systems as they are, not as tradition demands they be. He questions without destroying. He adapts. The council scoffed. Traits found in many species. Yes, Celara said, but humans built them into survival. All eyes turned to Elias. Human, the counselor said, you may speak. Elias stepped forward one pace. He did not bow deeply. He had learned that false submission only strengthened broken systems. I did not come here to challenge your empire, he said simply. I came because your people are afraid of change. Humans were afraid once too. A council member laughed softly. And what do humans know of empire? Elias met their gaze. We know what happens when power refuses to evolve. The words were calm, but they carried weight. We lost empires, he continued. Not to enemies, but to our own rules, the ones that stopped us from listening. The counselor's eyes narrowed. You are bold for someone facing exile. Elias shrugged lightly. Exile is just another word for beginning again. That unsettled them more than anger would have. The lead counselor raised a hand, silencing the room. Princess Selara, you admit deception, you admit defiance. By law, you may still withdraw your claim and preserve your position. Selara's heart pounded, but her voice did not shake. And let him be erased from history because he does not fit your design? No. Then you risk everything, the counselor said. Selara took a slow breath. I invoke the covenant of merit. The hall froze. Even the council stiffened. That covenant has not been used in centuries, one of them said. Because it is dangerous, Selara replied. It allows truth to challenge comfort. The lead counselor's voice was sharp. You understand what it means? Yes, Selara said. If my judgment is flawed, I lose my right to rule. A wave of whispers rushed through the chamber. Elias turned toward her fully now. Selara, he said quietly. She glanced at him just once. There was no fear in her eyes, only certainty. The tribunal will be suspended, the counselor announced. The Empire will observe, judge, decide. The great doors began to close. As the sound echoed through the hall, Elias realized something important. This was no longer about him. It was about an empire standing at the edge of its own future. And for the first time in generations, humanity stood inside that future, not as conquerors, not as subjects, but as proof that survival did not belong to blood alone. The days after the tribunal felt longer than any Selara had ever known. The palace still looked the same, with its shining halls and quiet servants, but something invisible had shifted. The empire was watching now. Not just the council, but scholars, governors, and citizens across 1,000 systems. The old law had been questioned out loud, and once a question was spoken, it could not be taken back. Elias was moved to a guest wing, not a prison, but not freedom either. Guards stood at a distance, more as symbols than threats. He spent his time reading old imperial records, many of them unused for centuries. Selara had arranged access for him, knowing that understanding the past was the only way to speak to the future. He noticed patterns quickly. Entire reforms were delayed not because they failed, but because they came from the wrong bloodlines. Brilliant minds were ignored. Slow decay followed. Humans had seen this before. He felt no anger, only a quiet sadness. Selara visited him when she could. When they were alone, she allowed herself to breathe. You should not have risked everything, Elias said gently one evening. She looked at him, tired but steady. I did not risk everything, she replied. I chose it. The council announced the final trial soon after. Not a punishment, they said, but an evaluation. Elias would be asked to help solve a problem the Empire had failed to fix for over 200 years. If he failed, the old law would stand. If he succeeded, the covenant of merit would be validated. The problem was not war or rebellion. It was stagnation. Trade routes were collapsing due to inefficiency. Entire systems depended on outdated structures that no one dared to change. The empire was strong but slow, and slowness was becoming weakness. Elias was brought before a smaller chamber this time, filled with analysts, governors, and council observers. Selara watched from the side, unable to interfere. You have limited time, the lead analyst said. Explain your solution. Elias did not rush. Humans had learned patience through failure. You are trying to preserve perfection, he said, but perfection does not grow, it only breaks. Some of the observers frowned. Your systems reward inheritance, Elias continued, but problems do not care who inherited authority. They care who understands them. He proposed shared leadership councils across species, temporary authority based on expertise, and systems that allowed mistakes without punishment. Not chaos, but learning. The room grew quiet. This would weaken noble houses, a governor said. Elias nodded. It would also strengthen your future. Data projections were run, simulations adjusted. Slowly, unwillingly, the results showed improvement, not dramatic but stable, sustainable. For the first time, the council had no immediate dismissal. The final session was held in the Great Hall again. The Empire waited, the lead counselor stood. The covenant of merit stands fulfilled. A wave of sound spread through the chamber. Shock, relief, fear. The execution order, the counselor continued, is dissolved. Celera closed her eyes, not in victory but release. Elias was no longer classified as an exception. The law itself had changed. The council did not apologize, they did not celebrate, but they adapted, and for an empire that old, adaptation was everything. Later, as the hall emptied, Celera approached Elias. "You stayed calm," she said softly. He smiled. "Humans learned that calm keeps us alive." She reached for his hand, openly now, without fear. Outside the palace, across distant stars, the news spread. Not that a human was spared, but that bloodline had lost its absolute power. The empire did not fall. It evolved. And humanity, once again, proved that survival was not about being the strongest in the room, but the most willing to learn. The future had begun quietly. The change did not end with the council's decision. That was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the empire moved carefully, like someone learning to walk on new ground. Old rules were not erased overnight. They were questioned, reviewed, and slowly reshaped. For many citizens, this was more frightening than war ever could be. Stability had always meant safety. Now stability itself was being examined. Celera felt the weight of it every day. As future ruler, she was invited to meetings that lasted for hours, sometimes days. Governors argued, scholars debated, and noble families tried to protect what they had always owned. Through it all, Celera listened more than she spoke. Elias had taught her that listening was not weakness, it was preparation. Elias, meanwhile, became something strange in the empire. He was not a noble, he was not a leader, yet his presence was requested in places where only high bloodlines once stood. Some welcomed him with curiosity, others with quiet resentment. He understood both. Humans had always lived as outsiders somewhere. One morning, Celera joined Elias on a balcony overlooking the capital world. Ships moved slowly through the sky, following new traffic paths designed after Elias' proposals. The system was already changing. "They are afraid," Celera said. Elias nodded. "So were we." "Did it ever get easier?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "No, but it got worth it." The council soon announced a new initiative. Cross-species advisory groups would be formed to guide imperial decisions. For the first time, position was not assigned by blood alone. Skill, experience, and understanding mattered. This created resistance. A group of noble houses openly challenged the reform, claiming it weakened tradition. They did not call for punishment or force. They used words, influence, and pressure. In many ways, it was more dangerous. Celera was summoned to address them. The chamber was smaller, filled with sharp eyes and controlled expressions. Elias was not invited. This was deliberate. "You are reshaping the empire," one noble said. "Without consent." Celera stood calmly. "The empire was already breaking. I am reshaping it so it can survive." "And the human?" another asked. "Is this about him?" Celera did not deny it. "It began with him, but it is not about him alone." They pressed harder. Accusations of emotional weakness, of betrayal of heritage, of abandoning her kind. Celera listened, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Our blood built this empire," she said, "but blood alone will not carry it forward." Silence followed, not agreement, but consideration. When Celera returned to her chambers later, Elias was waiting. He could tell something had changed. "They challenged you," he said. "Yes, and you didn't step back." "No," Elias smiled softly. "Then they'll follow eventually." Months passed. The reforms spread slowly, unevenly. Some systems thrived under the new model. Others resisted and struggled. The empire allowed both outcomes to be seen. Failure was no longer hidden. For the first time in its long history, the empire began to learn publicly. Elias continued to advise, but he never ruled. When offered a formal title, he refused. "Humans learned something important," he said. "Power changes people, ideas change systems." Celera understood. She let him remain what he was, a voice, not a throne. As her coronation approached, doubt returned. Not from fear of losing power, but from the responsibility of keeping change alive. Reform was fragile. One wrong decision could undo years of progress. On the night before the ceremony, Celera and Elias walked through the palace gardens. The stars above were clear. "If they reject me tomorrow," Celera said quietly, "the old order may return." Elias stopped and faced her. "Then someone else will challenge it again. Humans believe that ideas don't belong to one person." She studied his face. "That belief is dangerous." "It's also why we're still here," he replied. The coronation was unlike any before it. Representatives from multiple species stood alongside nobles. The ceremony words were updated carefully, respectfully. Bloodline was acknowledged, but no longer praised as destiny. When Celera took the crown, there was no sudden applause. Instead, there was something quieter, acceptance. Afterward, Celera addressed the Empire. Her message was simple. "We will not abandon who we were," she said, "but we will not fear who we can become." Across distant worlds, people listened, some hopeful, some skeptical, all aware that the Empire had crossed a line it could not uncross. Elias stood among the crowd, unnoticed by most. That was how he preferred it. Later, as the palace settled into its new rhythm, Celera found him again on the balcony. "You changed history," she said. Elias shook his head. "No, I reminded it how to move." She rested her hand in his, openly. No guards objected, no law forbade it now. The Empire did not become perfect. It became alive. And once again, humanity proved its quiet strength, not by ruling the stars, but by teaching them how to grow. The Empire entered a season of learning. Change did not move in straight lines. Some worlds accepted the new ideas quickly, while others resisted in quiet ways. Old habits were comfortable. Letting go of them felt like losing part of one's identity. Celera understood this better than most. Every decision she made now carried echoes of the past and weight for the future. As Empress, her days were filled with voices asking for guidance. Some wanted permission, others wanted protection. A few wanted assurance that the old ways would not disappear completely. Celera listened to all of them. She answered slowly, carefully. She had learned that rushing progress often broke it. Elias watched from the edges. He attended meetings when invited, spoke when asked, and stayed silent when silence was needed. Some in the Empire still disliked him, but fewer openly opposed his presence now. Time had softened fear. Results had done the rest. One quiet morning, Celera invited Elias to walk with her through the Hall of Records. It was a place few rulers visited often. Endless walls of memory crystals glowed softly, each one holding the story of a decision, a law, or a failure. "These records once only praised success," Celera said. "Now we are adding something new." Elias looked at her. "Mistakes," she nodded, "and what we learned from them." He smiled. "That's very human." Celera returned the smile. "I am learning." Not all challenges came from inside the Empire. Neighboring powers watched closely. Some respected the changes, others saw opportunity. An empire willing to question itself looked weak to those who valued dominance. Diplomatic messages grew sharper. Alliances were tested. The council urged caution. "Your reforms invite challenge," one advisor warned. "Strength must still be shown." Celera agreed, but her understanding of strength had changed. "We will show strength through unity," she said, "not fear." Elias helped draft responses that were firm without threat, honest without submission. Humans had survived centuries of diplomacy built on words sharper than weapons. He taught Celera how tone could matter as much as power. Slowly, tension eased. Some neighbors backed away, confused by an empire that refused to act as expected. Inside the empire, a new generation began to rise. Young citizens from different species applied for positions once closed to them. They brought new ideas, sometimes clumsy, sometimes brilliant. The system did not always reward them immediately, but it no longer shut them out. Celera made a point of meeting them. One young analyst, barely recognized by her own people, nervously presented a proposal for energy sharing between systems. It was risky and incomplete. Old Celera would have dismissed it politely. Instead, she asked questions. "How would you adjust this if it failed?" Celera asked. The analyst hesitated. We would revise it, learn," Celera nodded. "Then try." Word spread quickly. The Empire was no longer afraid of attempts. Elias noticed something else changing too. People spoke to him more freely. Not with awe or suspicion, but with curiosity. Some asked about Earth. Others asked why humans questioned authority so often. "We had to," Elias would say. "Authority didn't always protect us." "And now?" they asked. "Now we choose when it deserves trust." That answer stayed with many of them. One evening, Celera and Elias shared a quiet meal in her private chambers. No officials, no guards close enough to hear. "Do you ever miss Earth?" Celera asked. Elias thought carefully. "I miss what it taught me. I don't miss what it demanded." Celera understood that too well. As years passed, the Empire stabilized in a new shape. Not perfect, not fragile, just honest. Problems were addressed openly. Power shifted when needed. Bloodline still mattered, but it no longer decided worth. Some old nobles never accepted it. They withdrew, clinging to smaller circles of influence. Celara allowed it, forcing belief never created loyalty. One night, a message arrived from a distant system. A group of citizens had peacefully reorganized their leadership using the new merit principles. It was messy, slow, and full of debate. Celara read the report twice. "They did it without being told," she said softly. Elias nodded. "That's when change becomes real." As the empire moved forward, stories began to spread beyond its borders. Not stories of conquest or fear, but of adaptation, of a ruler who listened, of a human who refused to rule. Other civilizations took notice. Some sent observers, some sent students. Humanity, once overlooked, became known not for strength, but for perspective. Years later, Celara stood again in the great hall where everything had begun. The crystal pillars still reflected blue light. The throne still stood at the far end. But the silence felt different now. It was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. Elias stood beside her not as an exception, but as a choice she continued to make. "You never asked for this," Celara said quietly. "Any of it." Elias shook his head. "Humans rarely do, we just respond." She looked out at the gathered representatives of the empire. Different forms, different histories, shared future. "Will it last?" she asked. Elias answered honestly. "Only if they keep choosing it." Celara straightened her posture and stepped forward. The empire did not cheer. It did not kneel, it listened. And that more than any crown or law was the greatest change of all.